So now we're going to go into the 101 portion of network design and what that really means and all those acronyms. So I'm going to ask to come to the podium Darrel Maynard, the owner and operator of Eastern Kentucky Telephone and Technologies, Keith Gabbard, CEO of People's Rural Telephone Cooperative, and then Joel's going to stay here with the EX2, and let's see if we can get, does this unplug, Larry? Keith, why don't you get over here with him? I've got 3 chairs over here. I don't know if you can take that. I know, does it unplug where he can sit over here? No? Okay, we'll switch this one. All right. Give Joel his own, because bless his heart, he's sick. Pull that up to you, and Darrel and Keith can share. Just pull that one up to you. The other thing I want to mention to you all as we get started, you're not going to get over here and sit with them? Are you afraid of them?
If you want me to,
I do want you over here where y'all can all talk together. Have a conversation. We want to have a conversation now about design, and then we'll move right into lunch. So Darrel is going to kick this off as a member of the advisory team, and well, Keith is as well. And again, we need your feedback. These are designed to give you all the basic 101 of this dialogue, and so please participate with Q's and A's at the end, and let's have a conversation about design. Darrel.
Thank you, Hilda. First of all, it is noon. It's my lunchtime. Hilda, I was nervous that you put us after lunch on the first agenda. Now we're on the agenda before lunch, so we'll try to be brief. This is 101 for the plant design and network management. And we probably have a half a dozen or more people in here, I can see them in the back, that probably can come up here and do this just as well as we can. So basically what we want to accomplish is to give everybody here a opportunity to know some of the buzzwords and industry jargon. So as you're researching your idea for fiber deployment in your community, you'll be able to talk the network language a little bit better, at least have some kind of idea of what they're asking or talking about. So this is going to be very informal. We're going to stay high level, but we're going to, at any time, stop for questions on anything that we bring up. So we're going to bounce back and forth here between us, talking about engineering, construction, and network management. And Larry, if you would you have your microphone ready for anybody during this time to interrupt us and ask us questions in more detail? Because we're just going to talk about the acronyms like FTTP, what does that mean from a high level? So if we get too deep, tell us. If we're not deep enough, then you can ask the questions. I'm going to let Joel start out with the engineering side, and let me go right on to those slides.
Does this work now? Good. Okay. So from an engineering side, I think I've mentioned there's. Am I okay yet? I know. From an engineering side, of course, easements, permitting. I think the major thing that I'm thinking about with doing this is that what we found in the construction side of the house is that we can construct, as I mentioned, very, very quickly. It's trying to get the right to construct, be it make-ready, be it easements, be it permitting. We run into Indian tribal lands. We run into Bureau of Land Management. We run into a whole host, U.S. Forestry Service, state parks. I mean, there's a whole host of what we call authorities with jurisdiction that we need to go and find and make sure that we can have the right to do that. So typically on an engineering and side of the house, we'll take a look, and God bless Google Maps. They're the greatest tool in the world to be able to take a look on a preliminary design. But from an engineering aspect, then what you need to do is we call it feet on the street. After you do that preliminary design, you need to have actually somebody go out and make sure where you want to plop that fiber cable, you can actually do so. Wetlands comes into play. There's just a whole aspect that is all involved in outside plant, and as you guys go through this, I'm sure that you will hear some of these things when you talk to the folks. So.
So as that, what he was talking about, just be aware that the easements, permitting, and network topology design and network management, those are the things that you will be hiring probably to have done from your engineering group. And of course, this slide, by the way, slideshow will be available. Just give me your card at the end and we'll give it to you. This sort of gives you an idea of the elements that fiber engineering and design does. What the FTT means is the fiber to the premise network. Of course, you can add other acronym or other letters at the end. FTTH, FTTN. FTTH means fiber to the home. But as you're out there talking with various engineers and stuff, then you will be able to know that when they say FTT something, that they're talking about fiber. The next slide here, we'll go to the easements and right away. You want to talk about that a little bit, Joel?
Well, I think we've talked about that about 3 different times this morning already, but basically easements, right-of-way easements. One of the reasons I think that the state network, it's taken so long to get it is that, you know, there's a way to get it to get it on a sheet of paper and signed and legal and recorded and all that. But of course, PRTC, we're a nonprofit cooperative owned by the members. We just go around and get verbal permission to do things, and it's if we go back again, we go get verbal permission again. And most of the time, it goes a lot smoother and easier and quicker for us. Now, I'm not saying the answer is always a definite yes right off the bat, but it does, the way the state's probably being required to do it makes it a little more difficult for them. But as you go into building right away outside your service area, a CLEC or a new entity, a city or whatever, that'd probably be a little more challenging than what we're able to do it.
I'd mention on right away what.
While you guys are on the topic, if you could maybe just mention just a few little points about Dig Once policy. We've been getting a lot of questions about that at the center. You know, what is it, and what a community would need to do to get something like that in place?
Dig One policy is where your community makes a policy that any entity that's going to run a water line, sewer line, whatever, in your community, checks in with the governmental entity to make sure that they either want to or don't want to put fiber in the same trench that you're doing. So that's something very critical for every community to try to get on the books right away as soon as you can. So that way any kind of public works project that you have in your list of priorities, you can start including a fiber drop inside of that. So that's the Dig Once.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Usually what you'll see with municipal electric utilities or you know, authorities out there is they'll at least put a conduit in there. Not necessarily populate it with fiber, but you guys full well know the major cost of any fiber deployment is digging the dirt up and putting stuff back over the top of it. So if you're going to do it once. The other thing I'd mention about right-of-way, one of the things that we run into many times is that we will go to a US DOT or somebody that has given a private easement and say, can we do X? Well, they go back and they check their easement and they'll find that, yes, you can go X there, but you don't have the right to do Y, which is put a telecom service cable in there. So, you know, just because you have an easement for one section doesn't mean that you can go back and get the easement for telecommunications on a second one. I can tell you, Larry, we've asked for permission after we've built more times than I ever want to remember on some of the stuff back in the days, but you don't do that much anymore.
I do want you to point out here on the right-of-way, it shows the acronym ROW. And so that's sort of one of the things we wanted you to get out of this particular session is the acronyms as people start throwing them out. So if somebody says we're going out to work on row, That means they're working on right-of-way, so ROW.
And when we talk about permitting here, I mean, a lot of the permitting might be with the National Forest Service or with the state highway department or some of those things. And I think engineering, I'm not an engineer, but I know that good engineering might cost you a little more money on the front end, but it will save you money in the long run. And just to briefly, you know, I'm the CEO of PRTC. We serve 2 counties, Jackson and Owsley. We built a fiber to the premise network, serving all homes and businesses in both those counties. Population about 18,000. But we're also partners or co-owners of a company called East Kentucky Network that also owns about a 370-mile ring throughout Eastern Kentucky, fiber ring, and also owns a wireless company, Appalachian Wireless. Now, the CEO of that company and the president of the board and all 5 owners are represented here today. So there's a lot of incumbent players out here today that are doing the kind of work we are doing, and they are too. And I give a shout out to Foothills Telephone Cooperative. They were the first company in Kentucky to do fiber to the home. We sort of learned from them when we started our fiber to the. Of course, we got either we're faster or we got less customers because we got every single one of them before they did. But they started it, and I just want to give mention those companies that are part of that partnership in Eastern Kentucky, and there's other companies throughout the Kentucky. There's probably 20 telecom providers in Kentucky, and who knows how many cable providers. And we're members of both those associations, and they're doing a lot of work. And one of the reasons that we talked about this in the committee as we were putting this together, we want to include the incumbents. It's been mentioned several times. They've already spent a lot of money in these communities. And if there's a way to partner with them, it's a whole lot cheaper to build something and use them. It's been mentioned several times today, but that's a little off topic, but I wanted to throw that out there.
Well, that's exactly where we need to be. So each one of these slides aren't inclusive of the entire process, but are touching on some of the most critical components of fiber design and network management, permitting being one of them. Network design, this is where you actually just go out in the actual field and you engineer your distribution areas, your fiber huts, and your network topology, whether it's active or GPON. All of this we're going to talk about a little bit later on also as we go forward. These are the other things that are included in your engineering. Some words you'll need to remember is if it's fiber, it's going to be redundant. Needs to be redundant, need to have symmetrical service, and you need to have a networks operations center. So those things are all components of your engineering elements when you're designing your network.
And I might add, Darrell, that redundancy, if you notice, my name's not even on the program. Michael Stidham's supposed to be here. He's our operations manager, and he helped design the network we built. And we were going over these slides yesterday, and he said, when you talk about redundancy, remember, it's not just fiber redundancy, but you've got a lot of electronics that you need redundancy on as well, which we won't talk about how much money all this costs, but it adds to the cost of the network.
Yep. So the next section, that was the engineering. I don't know if, Larry, if anybody has any questions for just the engineering component of our discussion and the engineering elements.
Any questions? We need to pick their brain while we got them, guys.
It's not exactly an engineering question, but you were talking about what had been done in Jackson and Owsley counties. That was fiber to the home, as I understand it. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah. What did you do with the existing cable companies, Windstream, those type people, and the telephone companies?
Well, we were one of those. We were the telephone company. We were the cable company in much of the county already. We were already providing cable, and we were already providing telephone to all those counties. We were already providing cable to part of the county. And we didn't have a big cable company in our communities. We managed to work out a deal with the most of the cable companies that were already there, they weren't providing broadband, they were only providing cable. And most of them, we worked out a consolidation or a purchase arrangements with them, and so we're now, with our fiber, we're providing telephone, broadband, and cable TV throughout both counties.
This next section on construction elements, these are the main elements we'll be talking about. There's probably a slide here for each one of these, and if you want to, Keith, you can start out with outside plant, and then we'll just move on. So OSP.
Here's just a picture of a bunch of poles and a house, and that hut there, our terminology is a remote building, but it's basically where the electronics are that serve all three of the services that go over the fiber, the broadband, telephone, and TV. And you can go aerial using existing poles, build your own poles. We've done some of both. You can also do buried. We've got some of that too. Our network has about 30% buried, about 70% aerial. In eastern Kentucky, there's a lot of rock and mountains. It's a little more difficult to do buried than it is in maybe central Kentucky or out west. But this is just a diagram of sort of what an aerial network looks like. Joel, would you want to add anything to that?
Well, that's exactly right. From an outside plant construction aspect, usually when you're doing the engineering, one of the things in a feasibility study you're taking a look at is the cost comparison between what it would cost to bury the plant or what it would cost to have an aerial plant. That comes into a lot of factors. Linda and I drove down from Illinois, as Hilda mentioned. We came down Highway 27 from Frankfurt, and that stretch, probably about 20, 30 miles out there, I'm not sure I've seen any poles more heavily laden with fiber and copper coming down that. And that's one of the things you may start getting into. I'm an old wireless guy, so I was always looking at towers. Once I started getting into the fiber construction, I'm continually looking at telephone poles just to see how loaded they are. And you'll notice the big cables that are on there. And one of the things I know Larry mentioned also is what's happening in the industry right now is the make-ready problem and the touch once and all those types of things. We're starting to see more and more folks that are like in Larry's business that have seen their copper plant, that have been telephone cooperatives, that have been there for years and years and years, are starting to cost more on an OpEx than it's worth to truck rolls just to be able to maintain those things. And they're starting to say, it's time to move into fiber. So what they will do at that point in time is, instead of pulling the copper off the poles, is they will just attach to that and not have to do that. That's a less costly than, of course, pulling it down, putting a new one up, and all those types of things. So from a fiber to the premise, what we've done, you've seen the backbone route that I'm talking about, and then that little route that goes up to the house. That's usually different crews. It can be crews. The route going up to the house will not be typically buried in at 36 inches. I don't think, we typically don't. We do see 12 to 18 inches going up to the house. And then one of those little boxes being put up alongside of the house, being brought off that distribution cable.
Yes, Larry.
Yeah, I'm not going to jump too deep into the weeds because we've got our follow-up sessions that are going to get more and more specific and more detailed as we go along this process. But just for right now, with regard to running fiber to the home, could you just talk a little bit about what you run to the home? Is it a pair of fiber that goes all the way from the central office out to every single home? Is it one fiber? Do you have to go to distribution points? Just give us the overview.
Let us get to the active and GPON just a little bit later, because I think that's exactly where you're going to get that point, Larry. But that is a great question, and it goes to this. So far, these two pages are just been over the outside plant, OSP, doing the fiber to the premise or fiber to the home or fiber to the community. The next element that we'll talk about is probably one of the most costly pieces to the entire fiber deployment project today. So I'll let you talk about that first, Keith.
Well, we've heard the term make ready, I don't know how many times this morning already, but basically it's just when you want to add something to a pole, a cable or something, it's the cost to either change that pole or move the existing facilities that are already on it. It can get pretty costly and pretty contentious. You can see this pole right here. It's got a lot of different entities on it, and probably if you want to add something to that, there's a good chance that pole's going to have to be changed out, and all these people are going to have to move their cables, and it's going to be very costly. Whereas that one might not be as costly, but ironically, it could be more costly or more time consuming, depending on who owns that cable and who owns that pole. If it's somebody that don't want you through there, about your year and a half story, I mean, it might take even longer and be more costly. So it all depends on the players, the pole owners, and certainly how many cables are on there are big factors as well. And you know, when we were just in the ILEC serving our own internal counties, and we just had one electric co-op that we were working with, we didn't realize at the time, but it was fairly simple. Still cost several dollars, but it's fairly simple. But as we've moved out into other counties, as a partnership with Kentucky Wired, we've learned the hard way that this make ready can be a lot more expensive and a lot more time consuming.
Joel, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think I've probably said enough about make ready, and I agree with what he's talking about. It's one of the biggest bugaboos that you'll get into on any outside plant construction, because it's one of those things that you cannot really have control about. It's you fill out the forms, you wait till they get it done.
Any questions out there about make ready? Yes, got two. That's good. These are good questions. This is the time you need to address make ready, right at the very beginning.
If we want to use another utilities pole, are they legally obligated to allow anyone, like a municipality that's never been in this business before, are they obligated to, even, you know, obviously they can decide how much it costs for the make ready cost, but are they obligated to allow us to even have access?
That is a complex question. It requires 2 or 3 pieces to the answer. To start out with, you will have to be certified in some way before you can even ask them to be on that pole. So that's the first thing. A municipal can be certified to be on their poles. And then after that, it's just a matter if there's room on the pole. It really comes down to, can you stomach the amount that they are asking you to be on that pole? Because sometimes they'll just ask you to replace the entire pole and put a brand new in there. So sometimes it's a matter of re-engineering around an area or an issue and maybe putting in your own poles in certain areas or whatever. So
Yeah, most of the time, it's not a question of are you allowed to, but are you willing to pay what they're going to charge you?
exactly.
And you know, if it's a big national company, they're probably going to charge you just to go look at it, and you got to pay them up front to do that. Then they're going to give you an estimate of what it costs, and you got to pay that up front before they'll even plan on changing it or doing it. So, you know, we paid hundreds of thousands already up front for just a few poles that haven't been done yet. But it's not a real pleasant experience. Most of the time they don't want you there, so obviously they are not going to be able to make it easy for you.
Darrel, you had mentioned certification. There was
Yes.
a question back here about certified by whom?
I don't know. FCC, I'd say, is the first place to start. One of the places.
Well, I don't know if your question is about where you're at. There's communication space, and then above the neutral zone, there's the power space. Those are 2 different types of folks that would install on those poles, if that's what your question is about, because there's certainly the lineman folks that go above the power.
If it was for communications or fiber, then it would be within that lower space. But I would assume at this point in time, probably need to get some clarification from a telecom lawyer. But I think that the FCC is the place to start.
Thank you.
Is there any best practice for a city or a county to do to make ready easier? If we say, well, we really want this to happen, is there something we as a county and cities should do?
talking about doing it yourself or making it easier for someone else to do it? Well, I would say if you have any local regulations on top of the state and federal ones, obviously you could make those a little easier. I don't know that you do. Most of the regulations that I'm aware of are on the state and federal level. Of course, in small communities, typically we don't have a lot of local regulations on make ready. But in bigger cities, then that might be different.
Well, I'll address one right now where an example that it makes it difficult is in the city of Louisville. There was a big issue just recently where when Google came in, they were trying to get the city to do a make-ready ordinance, and it did not bode well for them. I'm not even sure it's still settled yet between AT&T and Windstream. So a utility, or a city or a municipal can try if they want to make it easier by having policies. I think the best way, in my opinion, is just to have a good relationship with them and try to figure out how you can work together for the benefit of the community, because I'm not sure what happened in Louisville really helped anybody on Make Ready.
Yeah, there's ownership. The pole is owned by X and Y. And typically that can be the telephone company and the electric utility, either public power or the municipal utility within that town. And there are procedures that you need to go through, paperwork you need to fill out. The maddening thing for us in Mount Washington is we found that each one of those entities subcontracted to a third party to go out and take a look at the same pole, both of those two different ones. And that's really what they're talking about with this touch once, is if we're gonna do it, we don't mind doing it, but let's not make it a long, drawn-out procedure in doing it, because you would seem the same form can be used no matter what, because we're all doing that.
Oh, question. I'm sorry.
I have a question, having already tried this with our local utility company and rejected, because there's all of those different entities, and they had subcontractors doing some of the work, and one of them went bankrupt, and all of that on their line is hanging there, and it's a safety issue for them, for their linemen to go out there, and it's a cost issue now to pull that bankrupt entity off their pole. So you said plant your own poles. Aren't we then getting into easement issues again?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
And trying to work with them to plant our own poles in those
No,
areas?
no, you won't be working necessarily with them. It's however you design your route, wherever you design it. You'd get your own easements for that.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, that's always an option. Build your own, put your own poles up. It can be costly, but it's you can control your own destiny that way.
The next thing is on part of it is, oh, I'm sorry.
No, I thought I'd just chime in. As far as certification, our experience was we had to be designated as a CLEC in order to get our pole attachment agreements with AT&T and Windstream. And so with the exception of municipals, if we need a pole attachment agreement, we're not able to negotiate one. We do have the route. You can go to the PSC and take that route. It's a little bit antagonistic, and it's a lot better if you can just work it out. But, there's that. We experience all these problems with easements. Would love to have just been able to go get verbal yeses. And apparently that was discussed last year, but government can't do things as freely as the private sector can sometimes. I would love to be able to do that, and we just can't. And then, on the make ready, we've run through all these problems from having to replace poles. It's very complex, and something that one of the things you are able to do is build into your pole attachment agreements some ability to do some self-perform. With AT&T, they have a real issue with they have a hard, fast contract with CWA. And the Communication Workers of America are the only workers who are able to move AT&T's plant on their poles, period. And CWA will strike over this. If AT&T were to do me a favor and say, no, your guys can go out and move our stuff, CWA is going to strike. And no major telecommunications company is going to jeopardize its relationship, especially if it's a good one, like that one is, over a state project. But in our pole attachment agreement, we can use AT&T approved subcontractors to move other people's plant if they haven't moved it. So after 60 days, if we give another attacher a 30-day notice, if you haven't moved your own stuff by the next 30 days, we're going to have an AT&T approved subcontractor go out and move it for you. We have that right under our pole attachment agreement. It would be better if the other attachers would move their own plant. But, I mean, I'm in a situation with the Kentucky Wired project where we don't have the luxury of waiting anymore. And so at this point, you know, we do have that right to self-perform. So it's a two-touch. Instead of one-touch make-ready, it's sort of a two-touch make-ready situation. And with the last thing I would say, with Louisville and their one-touch make-ready ordinance, it's still moving its way through the legal process. AT&T challenged that in court. They're arguing that the FCC has jurisdiction over pole attachments, and no city can pass an ordinance that trumps the FCC rules on pole attachment. And so, depending on how that court case plays out, either other cities will do what Louisville did, or they won't be able to. The FCC did have a proceeding open about a month ago asking for comments. They're looking at maybe some elements of a national one-touch make-ready regulation, because this issue keeps popping up. And they were looking for comments. I'm not sure if that comment window is closed or if it's staying open, but you might want to look into that and see if you can file comments, if it's something you're interested in, because that's always an option for you.
Just to close on that real quick, although it's very detailed, it is manageable, and the majority of the management comes through developing a good relationship with the people that have the poles in the first place.
And I want that certification to be a CLEC is pretty simple and easy. It's not really very complex.
Okay, next.
Well, right-of-way clearing is basically, of course, if you're on somebody else's poles, you might not have to worry about this as much. But if you have your own, this is an ongoing cost. You've got to keep the trees out of the way of your lines, and because if it's not trees, storms, tree limbs falling on your lines, it might be squirrels chewing on your fiber, and that seems to be more of a problem these days with fiber than the problems we had with copper. That was something else. But it seems like squirrels like the taste of that fiber. But in eastern Kentucky, at least, I don't know if it's that way everywhere else.
Real quick, just because we have still little to cover yet, we have 3 categories of fiber connections, fiber distribution. One is trunk lines, which is basically the Kentucky Wired, the laterals, which are getting out to the communities, and then the actual fiber drop to the home. So just laying that out there as vernacular for you as somebody's describing what they're trying to do for you.
Of course, this is just a sample of a type of fiber, 48-strand fiber, and Hilda held up some fiber earlier, and that's a drop. And we actually, one of our senior staff, Jeff Bingham, set up some fiber things on this table over here. If anybody's interested in seeing, there's several different kinds of fiber. There's an ONT that goes on the outside of the house, the termination point, as well as the battery back up on the inside. And then there's what we call a gigacenter or an inside ONT. It also has a built-in router there, as well as he's actually got a fiber splicing machine over there. He can show you how he splices fiber, which is one of the more expensive parts of installing fiber optics.
Okay. The next then is just after all the outside plant. First of all, are there any questions on outside plant? Because that's basically what that was about covering, just what's outside in the field, what you're actually have to manage on a day-to-day basis after you build your system. So here is the network elements itself. So this is the operations part. This is where you have the OSP, outside plant personnel, the network operations center where you have people inside the NOC that actually handle the electronics. Then you have the IP network that they're managing, and then there's the customer premise equipment, which is the equipment inside your house. So Joel, you want to talk about the outside plant maintenance, some of the elements of it?
Well, certainly the 2 types we talked about, aerial and buried. Aerial is pretty easy to see. so you don't have to worry about finding it if something goes wrong. A car runs into it, or we have the same thing with squirrels for some reason just love to chew on that cable. And that's basically the maintenance issues that we'll have. Locating is the other part of outside maintenance. So if you buried that plant, there's typically a tone that's embedded in the cable or embedded in the conduit that you can put on each end. And those are those little orange flags or blue flags or yellow flags that you'll see stuck along the roadway at times if somebody's going to build something within your location. So locating is a part of the outside plant maintenance that you do. Typically on the routes that we have, it's a middle mile network. We're running up and down those roads at least once a month, just making sure that the other thing, I mentioned that I look at poles. If you're going up and down the highway and you see a pole sticking up with a little orange top on it, that means there's fiber optic cable that's buried underneath that location. And those are typically those locations where we're going to go in and put tone on and then plant in case somebody's going up and down that roadway. So that's the portion on ours. Larry, do you have?
Well, then, of course, if that fiber gets cut or broken in some way, then you gotta have somebody up there to repair it. And I can remember when we first put fiber up, we had to hire people from another state to come in and splice it. And then we started training our own people to splice fiber, and we found out we had to send, I think it was all the way to Texas A&M for a course on fiber optic splicing. Of course, that's all changed nowadays, but most of our service guys, if not all of them, have training and can splice fiber. And that could be a very expensive part of maintaining it, but all that's in-house with us.
And I guess that's where I thought you might have been going with the certifications, because certainly in splicing you will have certifications that are on the ownership of the fiber and who you have certified on being able to do it and the warranty that those folks will put on the fiber itself.
So the next thing is daily maintenance is the Network Operations Center. Now, not all of them will look to the level this is. This is a very sophisticated one. I don't know, I haven't been to yours, Keith. Why don't you describe yours for us?
Well, we have a whole building that's sort of this plus some other things called our operations center, but there are a lot of monitoring devices on our huts or remotes, as well as our fiber and our routers and everything else that tell us if something goes wrong or if all our generators are starting as we test them every week or things like that. That's all part of network management. And everything's pretty automated. Pretty much tells us, gives us an alarm if something's going on. Sometimes even if something's not going on. But we have some people there, but also if they're home or wherever they are, it doesn't matter where they are, they're going to be told if something, there's an alarm going off if it's a night or weekend or whatever.
I think you'll find anybody in the business that is in the operator business is finding that the electronics is becoming smarter and smarter and smarter and smarter, because they don't want to do a truck roll any more than you want somebody to do a truck roll coming out to your location. We talk that CapEx isn't what's going to kill you on a build, it's OpEx. And how well the network is put together and the electronics and how well you can maintain that electronics over a period of years.
And we got alarms if somebody left the door open or if the air conditioner's not working properly or any of that, pretty much something's going to tell us.
Yep.
So far on in the network management itself, you have the outside plant, which is traditionally just the right-of-way clearing and the actual fiber cuts and the location and stuff on underground. And then you have the Network Operations Center, which has electronics in it also to support all of the fiber network. But out in the field, there's electronics also, and that's part of your IP network that's delivering your Ethernet throughout the whole system itself. And so you'll see, like on a pole, you'll see a container there, like a splice case or a electronics case that's housing some electronics that needs to be managed and serviced, as well as you have the huts or the remote terminals out in the field that will also need that same level of support. So as you're looking at this, and this is probably the component too that will need more attention down the road from investment, because your fiber usually is a 30 to 40-year investment, including the poles most of the time. But your electronics are going to be the elements that gets upgraded anywhere from 7 to mostly 7's a good average, because sometimes it's shorter, sometimes it's longer. So, especially as the technology gets more. You guys want to say anything about that? The electronics?
Well, electronics, you're right. I mean, that's, whether it be a big router that makes this thing work in our system, a Cisco router or something like that, or whether it be the electronics of Calix is what we use, that's what these ONTs are, that's on the outside of the house or the inside of the house, or whether it be just a set-top box for TV or just the routers for the internet, all of that's going to be.
Right.
No, that is your domain. We put it in, we turn it over to you.
And basically, the last thing is the CPE. The ONT, which has been mentioned a couple of times, is the optical network terminal. And that's the piece that the fiber attaches to on the edge of the house. I don't have a picture of it up here, but you'll see one over here on the little gray box that's standing up there. It's called an ONT, optical network terminal. And it's usually maintained by the local provider that's installed it. But inside the home, you have CPE, and sometimes the provider will manage it, and sometimes you have to own it yourself. And that's basically what this part here is the customer premise equipment. So that's what's inside the home. So on the outside of the home, the connectivity is the box on the table over there, and on the inside of the home, that distributes your fiber and your Ethernet to the rest of the home, are a box somewhat similar to one of these. So we're close to the end. If there's any questions for any of the panel?
Any questions?
It must be lunchtime.
Or we
Yeah.
bored them to death, or we did a really good job, 1 of 3.
Well, as I mentioned, we are getting close to lunchtime.
I just want to mention on CPEs, as a lender, when you're doing your budget and thinking about it, your customer premise equipment isn't just, it's an investment, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but you never count on getting anything back out of that, because that's in the customer's home, and it's up to their care. So it is one, every time you take on a new customer, it's another CPE cost. So where some of yours will serve a network, that's a cost that's ongoing. So
Good.
this is a point. Any more questions?
Well, when you do get up to grab a lunch, make sure you stop over there and take a look at this equipment. It's quite fascinating, and they did go through the trouble of bringing it all the way over here just so that you could have something to take a look at and hold.